Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name's Lawrence Sillers. I'm head of the Henry Moore Institute and had the immense pleasure of working recently with Michael E. Smith, who joins us this evening for an evening with Michael E. Smith. Michael, great to see you again.
You too.
Michael's exhibition opened here in March and runs through until June 18th. So if you haven't yet had a chance to see it, please do so. Um, this feels like a really special evening. I think it's fair to say, Michael, this isn't something that you do a huge amount of in a public arena. So thank you so much for agreeing to speak tonight and being part of this really special event to coincide with your exhibition. But Michael, before an exhibition opens, I was thinking about the balance that is such a force within your work once it comes into existence. There's this element of balance to do with life and metaphorical connection. There's a lot of formal balance and play, this sort of insistence in many respects of pairs and symmetry. But I think there's an interplay of balance or opposing forces before the exhibition starts. And on the one hand, you have this force of kind of planning, thinking, rigor, control, testing materials. And then the other, there's this big slice of improvisation where you kind of let go of control a bit, or at least you're dealing with forces that you can't control. So to go back to the method bit, you work with found materials. Could you talk us a bit about, the research, the planning, how do you gather those materials? What processes are at play there?
Yeah. Well, in the studio, when asked to do something like, oh, by the way, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who came, and thanks to Adam for DJing. So yeah, in this, right off it always feels pretty impossible, and so like the practical details of material, that pull you're talking about is a trust is in the middle there, and underneath it, I don't completely fall apart because I know eventually if I just keep walking, I'll be able to negotiate those two. But it's fairly straightforward. I mean, if something interests me, I bring it in. I mean, if there's something that shows up in our path, I work with one person, one friend in the studio, and it's a very unprofessional atmosphere in that there's like not other than our dedication, which is really professional, but what's expected or what we'll do or how things work is pretty open. And, so materials come, they show up. I mean, I definitely, seek out specific materials at times because nothing in my practice is really law. So there's some works that come in my head just almost fully complete. And then there's materials that show up, and I'm a bit like I like free stuff. So often if we're driving by something and it's really practical, it's just like if it's free, I can at least fuck with it for a little while and have nothing to lose. And then it starts to develop, and that's where the impossible part feels, is like I get asked to do this show, which seems like for a million reasons why I'm not going to be able to do this again. Why me, just all types of defeating negative language. And then on the flip side of that is just kind of obsessive need to touch things and look at them. And in the studio, that focus on materials starts to develop as it gets closer. I would say the first 80% of the preparation period leading up to an exhibition is just like deep space. I mean, there's not a lot of, we try to get me to, wrangle things, but it just seems to be that at that point, it's just wherever I'm going. And then as time nears, then a kind of almost like a conceptual haze or something. It's difficult to explain, but I start to edit down and sharpen relationships, but in a fairly material way. And then towards the end, Jesse and I and other artists, people I invite in, put a pretty intense evaluation or description, just really trying to understand what these materials are, what these possible combinations are, what they mean in the world, what people will read in them. And that's more to kind of get rid of anything that's not, that could go astray. And so what I'm left with is like almost like an alphabet of materials that, if you know a garden hose really well, you know what it is in the world, and you know what that particular hose is, and you know what it can do. And there's a lot of practical details as well, like looking at the size of the space and how much mass or density is needed for me to feel safe. And those feel like distractions to kind of help me feel safe while I'm waiting. And then we'll sometimes have some fairly specific ideas, a lot in, and those don't usually pan out. So
If you could just say a bit more about, I mean, you've touched on those histories, those triggers, those resonances that are there. What is it that you're homing into when you're searching whatever field, metaphorically or otherwise it is? What is it in an object? It's marks, it's...
I mean, it's all of it. Yeah, it's the specific marks, but then, I had a professor once who, it alleviated some of the anxiety around, looking and talking about work, and described it essentially as, if you really just start to describe what you're looking at and continue to do that for past the point of it being uncomfortable, the meaningful world just kind of unfolds in front of you. And so it's just essentially that. It's like getting really close. That's kind of the amazing privilege of it, is that I, on a daily basis, get to, I mean, it's also incredibly painful to look at us and the world every day, but it's also a lot of, it keeps me alive. So, yeah, and that's it. So it's the particular usage. It's the ghosts in particular objects, but also their social. Also their how they all become kind of a nexus for information, and that they can't really be tied down. It's like my mother or something. The closer you get to a person, the harder they are to fully describe. And getting that close to a material where it feels kind of alien, or it's like repeating the word ketchup enough, all of a sudden it doesn't sound like ketchup anymore. So it's like having a very intimate relationship and a thorough understanding, being very close to a material. And then in that, it also becomes much more than it would normally.
And I really like that you call it an alphabet. I've been calling it a toolkit, but actually alphabet is a lot more fitting. But I think it's important to just make clear that this alphabet comes together in your studio rather than something that happens once you're on site. So that those letters, those words, those objects are a predefined, limited repository, which then ships as a whole to your site of display. Right. So there is a key point.
And that's where the safety is, because when we ship, I understand that there's an interchange, there's like a relationship between everything that I've sent. And so that, and the reason I talk about it as a haze is because it's a structure, like conceptually, and just a structure in general, but it's a loose one, a foggy one with potential still. Yeah. And yeah, it's not, I've been, I think some people think that I'm not a pack rat. I don't keep a lot of things around. And in the editing process, we get to a place where it's probably not apparent to anyone else. And there's definitely some bizarre and idiosyncratic relationships that only I recognize, but it's there. I feel safe in that zone, so that when I show up, I know, like, however, I can let myself drift and be a little free, because I understand the constraints of that alphabet. It's hard to, get away from it. And there's times where we add things that we need at the last second that, so there's definitely room for it to develop. And that's really important, that it doesn't, I remember all along in the beginning, I tried to plan as best I could. And there's just something about the risk and the excitement of interacting with a space and a situation that drives me. And, anytime something feels done, I'm kind of done with it. So it was really in the beginning just the only way that I could feel satisfied, because it just seemed so unbelievable that I was even given the opportunity, and took that so seriously that I noticed that I was doing it naturally, and then I began to kind of learn about that and figure out ways to like protect it and support it. And, because it's hard to have a practice that's so it's tiring and it wears on me, but it's also exhilarating.
So you move from, I mean, the relative safety of that alphabet to a space that has a lot more of the unknown. You don't do site visits. You constrain the time that you have available to install exhibitions. Could you move us into that part of the process and your relationship with the sites of display and what happens on day one?
Yeah, I mean, the site visit thing is, again, in the beginning, I would do them. I don't like traveling particularly, and I have children, and I started showing. Me and my partner, we had already had a son, and my daughter was on the way, and so, spending a lot of time on site. I just don't like traveling in general, and I quickly realized that the research I was doing on those site visits wasn't very productive. It would leave memories that were unreliable. It just seemed like a waste of time. And I noticed in the few times that I didn't do a site visit, that initial experience of coming to a place has a charge to it that was more productive, actually. And so it just depends on the size of the place. Again, I've tried, also really uncomfortable with catalyzing or locking in any way. I remember like all along people had encouraged me to like commit to something, and like, is it site specific or is it this, or do you do that, and that's always felt really limiting as well. To just, I mean, I do tend to do the same thing over, but it's a natural journey to that. And yeah, and when I get there, it's, I'm always trying to think about better ways to do it and healthier ways to do it. And but always it just feels pretty impossible. And the time constraints, again, is like 20 days or 5 days. It's going to be the same. So, 5 to 10 days feels healthy. And I like to work, if possible, when no one else is around, just for very practical reasons. I can focus better. It's easy for me to be distracted, especially when it looks like you don't know what you're doing, because the first few days are just like looking at the lights and how, where people move, what time do people show up, how does this place feel, how do these doors work, the infrastructure, and because a lot of times we'll want to experiment with the infrastructure, so it takes a day just to like figure out where the lights are, and so that when people aren't around, we can mess with the system a little bit and figure out ways to make it a little bit unstable. And that entire time is pretty anxious, like, because it feels really impossible every time. And roughly almost like you can set your watch to it, about the halfway period I will have built something that's somewhat based on this vision I had in my head, and then it'll occur to me that that's really not that good and doesn't have what it needs. And then I start from scratch 3 days out, and it comes together sometimes at the last minute. And there's some shows where I feel like I didn't have enough time that I would have made changes. I mean, this one was very special because the very last night before the opening, I was able to get to a place that felt fully resolved. And I think a lot of that has to do with Jesse Sullivan, an artist that I've been working with for the last year and a half, and his incredible contributions and support that's allowed me to keep the important aspects of the practice that are loose, but tighten up other areas and take pressure off me and the install in other ways. That it just was by far the most productive and smoothest install yet, and I have no regrets. So.
We're going to show a video of the exhibition in a second, but there's one critical element in your work that I think maybe we haven't even spoken about properly before. I think it's something that you feel but don't necessarily speak about, and that's light. And light is so important in terms of what you add, what you take away, and as a kind of sculptural act with the building itself, there is so much at stake in terms of what you don't show as much as what you do, but also what you reveal. Um, can you just talk about light and how you work with that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, this was something early on that just struck me as a really basic and fundamental thing to deal with for a few reasons. I mean, just on a practical level, I can use light to kind of gather or create a total zone or an umbrella, and how light works between rooms. And it also, on a subtle level, because I also know that people don't have a lot of time, so it's like, and they're used to the routines of attendance and the ego, and if so this is a difficult situation to, like, versus music where you could experience in your home totally comfortable and focused. So how do you give someone something like that without a sign that says take off your shoes or one in at a time, which I always found to be like absolute, like the worst way to experience something, because then I'm completely aware of my like dirty socks or something. It's just, so how could I, and I remember reading about Frederick Laumstead talking about like the degree to which it sounds a bit like social engineering, so it gets scary, and that's definitely there, but like how severe an angle could turn before people walking in a park would realize that they're turning. And so that's where I started to, understand the value of like, removing door handles or dealing with lights that would, make people pay attention. It's a little dangerous if it's not what you expect. And then at that point, you're really looking and thinking and feeling, I think, in that situation. And then there's also like social, like they mean things to mess with those structures that are so dependable. So, and yeah, and then quality of light. Oftentimes places will have mixed light, like, warm lights in one room, cool lights in another, natural light. And they all, to me, it's like a rainbow. It's like so confusing. So I oftentimes, the very first thing I want to do is find some baseline of uniformity or something, and we spend a lot of time actually dealing with that, things that I'm not sure. For me, it's like maybe like tuning an instrument. I mean, if you get it right from the beginning, then the rest can proceed naturally. And, by just clicking through those practical concerns, it distracts me enough to where, good ideas can come in the side, because for me, they don't, if I put too much pressure on the impossibility of doing something worth your time, I will melt down. But I can deal with getting the lights right, so, and we just walk through those things while the rest is happening in the back of my head. So
Thanks, Michael. We could spend at least an hour, I think, talking about why yours is the kind of sculpture that needs to be seen, experienced, and, a kind of work that you must be present for, and how it has a peculiar relationship with reproduction. Nevertheless, we're aware that some people who are tuning in have seen the exhibition, others haven't. To aid, well, perhaps both, we're just going to run a video document of the exhibition that I think encapsulates it as best one ever can in 2 dimensions. I'm going to go back to the wings now. We'll watch that film. You're going to then walk everyone around the exhibition, talk about a few other things. We'll come back at the end to do some questions. Some questions have already started to come.
There's some good ones. There's some good ones.
Good ones only. Please just send through any thoughts, any question is absolutely welcome. We'll do that at the end, but keep them coming so we can transition to questions swiftly. I'll hand over to the video and then to you, Michael. Thank you.
So I think we'll cue some images now, Adam, if you can, and then I'll just, I plan to just kind of describe and speak through the rooms or works one by one. And I think through images is the best way to do that. So yeah, so we flexed on the lobby a lot, and went through various scenarios. And this show is interesting because as I was watching this video, it occurred to me that virtually everything we did was, none of it was in any recognizable form in the studio. And this video was actually from maybe 5 years ago. There was some footage where I was collecting footage from dog kennels and rescues, things like that, from live feeds to webcams, from different like webcam providers that allow access to this. So I just ripped footage, and this was a clip I located from a kennel daycare kind of place, I think, shelter for dogs. And so, but this one stuck with me because you can see what I assume is the dog's owner or caretaker's coat and familiar objects. And the dog gets up and does one perfect circle and lays back down, which made me think of the spinning computer thinking thing. And so, we chose to use one of those monitors again. It's like I could hang a monitor in the space and so on, but to come across it in this way above the reception, I think really, I hope, throws people into it in a much more intense way than a passive viewing. In terms of initially, you're trying to figure out what is it and why is it there in a more urgent way than like pondering an art video, for instance. But it felt, even though this was from previous research, it rose into my mind and felt, when I look at it now, I feel like it's actually really the maybe the heart of it. But yeah, and so then we segue into the first room, and I played some throughout the install with these windows in the back and really liked these uneven shutters. And so in the end, they just, are as they are. And the lighting system is pretty shut down. And this television that we brought, and this rock that's shaped like a speech bubble from like a cartoon. Again, these were, in the studio, I had kind of situated other scenarios and potentials. I think potentials is the good way to think about it, because I'll try everything. It's just in the studio, I just give, the more horrible ideas I have, then I can get rid of those and just, keep the ones that maybe have potential. So I know so much about what these things can do, but this relationship, this kind of perfect touch of the rock to the corner of this broken television. And the television has got dirt build up. And I think if you look close, it's clear that this is a salvage television from the trash, rather than, for instance, like destroying a perfectly good television. It's clear that it's, a waste. So we can go to the next image if you could, Adam. And then to the right, you have an exit corridor that had this nice pink light. And, we had played with works, and, so I'm working as much time that I can be in the space working that's healthy. I try to, so I don't sleep as much and like to do, 10, 12 hours a day. And it doesn't really feel like work. So, but in the end, nothing's happening in these other spaces other than how they, you have these two kind of exits or ways out, and this blue chair, which again, if we can move to the next image, the ball. So the relation, a lot of the works come first as like a joke in my mind, or a humorous scenario that kind of covers a more serious trouble. And so I was thinking about these basketballs bouncing down the stairs, and then a game we used to play, or kids used to play, I don't know if they still do, called Duck, Duck, Goose, because the chair work, essentially the relationship of the ducks to the word duck, and, you know, getting out of the way of something. And and then having both basketballs fixed in a position that was absolutely perfect allowed them to, you know, in my mind, I could animate them falling down the stairs, and at the same time, immediately at the same time, you know, make clear that they're fixed and formalized. And the relationship, so the ducks was something that Jesse came across and sent me an image of, and I was like, oh yeah, grab that. Because I work with animal materials from time to time, but you know, I'm an animal lover. My family are from the South. My grandparents had a farm in Mississippi, so I grew up with summers in Mississippi, and then the rest of the year in Michigan and Detroit area. And but so most of what I source is from like secondary markets. I don't, you know, and this is from an old natural history museum. It was really old, and they were like these zombie ducks, and they had layers of dust on them and dirt. And I had a completely other idea. And then in the process, towards the end, I realized that the curvature of the top of this wooden platform that they were set to, this fake environment that they're living in, matched the curvature of the top of this worn blue chair. And I had removed the cushions, or the kind of the muscle, you know, like chairs. Most objects relate to the human body in some way. And then animals for me are stand-ins for us as well, or at least our relationship to the network of life. And so just positioning them opposed to gravity on this dangerous position. A friend referred to them as like a familial situation with a grandfather and you know, kind of family and responsibilities on its back. I mean, that's another thing, is that formally, by situating them ahead of time, understanding what they are, and then dealing with them in ways that are primarily formal concerns, it leaves them open. So, I mean, I don't know what these works are definitively in my head. A lot of them are still very curious and mysterious to me, but they carry the kind of feeling, and I hope, you know, that's what I'm looking for in the end, is something that makes sense immediately and resonates deeply, but evades and avoids understanding, or puts understanding sometimes so clearly in a cliche way that you know that's not what it is. It's too obvious. So, but we can go to the next image. Yeah, and so this was I came across someone who was selling a musk ox pelt, and I was so taken with the fact that this animal has they're found in the Arctic and Alaska and northern Canada, places like this, and essentially like a large bison with long hair, and the quality of the hair was similar to human hair. It wasn't like horse mane or tail where that's, you know, these thicker bristly hairs. It was very close in like in its gauge and material consistency to human hair. And yeah, but incredibly exotic, right? I mean, it's just far, you know, and I could never, to me, it was always like a butterfly or a map, like a mirrored map of the United States, a frightening version where there's two Floridas. And attached to it on site. So I had very different ideas about how this work would situate. And on site, I just, you know, continue to test these things and try things. And I had brought along a first aid kit that you would typically find in like a break room, or, you know, at a restaurant, or any employment situation where employees might, you know, get cut or something. So it's a basic metal first aid cabinet, and then it's attached face flush. So it's essentially drilled through the door, the opening of the first aid cabinet, into the musk ox pelt, which I've done this before too. And like, keeping the focus on how objects, that everything means something, that it's not just about viewing it, I think are ways to read it. And yeah, so and it's still a bit like a butterfly or an angel or a demon or something like that to me. And I was also thinking about like history, and someone mentioned cave paintings in Lascaux, and it as a hide and warmth and protection, but also just skin and hair and yeah. But again, and then you have the opening of the door that you can see, and then you have the first aid kit, and then to the left, if we could switch to the next image. So so this was like one of the moments where it really started to come together as well when I was struggling. But all of a sudden it occurred to me, I was playing with this a couple of days before we left. A neighbor from my studio had put out a couple of broken old, a DVD player and a VCR, and I just threw them in the packing, kind of happenstance. And so I was looking at these doors, and all of a sudden I saw like eyes, like cartoon eyes, Bugs Bunny or something. And a reoccurring situation is for me to view art, the world, exhibition making through cartoons, and particularly ones I grew up with, and probably for a lot of reasons. But so quickly I saw that these were kind of like Bugs Bunny eyes. And maybe 6 hours later, I started to, the idea of a title, like I don't title things unless the title occurs in the making as an integral piece of the work. It's never after the fact, like I finish something and then search for a title. If the title rises and feels as important as any other component, then that happens. And otherwise I try to rely on the material list to point people in the direction of really reading these things on many levels. And also at this time I was the latest version of of artificial intelligence, the GPT-4 had come out. And so at night in the room when I would go home, I was reading Twitter way too late, trying to make sense of this stuff. And so I think that had something to do with it as well. These eyes that are staring in via pupils that are, mediators with light behind it, so the directional, and then also the formal qualities of just, art in its most basic sense and alien sense of squares and monochrome painting and white cubes and structures of any kind, and bugs as well, like kind of crawling on your skin, to bugs in systems or problems, and then of course Bugs Bunny, who has a character that I think is familiar in a lot of different situations. So we can go to the next one. Thank you. And then this last room was really difficult. So these tables, this is like a good example of how things come together. But so the tables, there's two tables there, and my friend Jesse had a table identical to the table I had in my kitchen that were both being used currently. And so I brought my kitchen table in, and we still haven't replaced it. We're using like an old, basically like a card table. But my children are pretty savage, so that it's really beat down, and all kinds of finger marks. And Jesse's table had somebody stuck a piece of gum under it. So there's some heavy wear on these kind of classic knockoffs of mid-modern, small tables, and they were in different positions. And then so I got this room to the point to where everything was right, except for we had a light on in the elevator, which made this kind of the yellow of the elevator prominent, and then broke the coloring into this traffic light scenario, which I for some reason found it was like not a good discovery. It troubled me that it so present was the idea of stop, go, and caution. And then in the very last night, struggling with this work and trying to figure out how to get this last room to feel right, we just figured out that we could mask the motion sensor in the elevator to get it to stay dark. And then you had a much simpler relationship, still the go and stop, but in a much more basic and less cumbersome to read. And the tables, this positioning of them, again, I was thinking about them more in terms of two eyes, but on site, playing with them, they started to become this kind of fountain or pouring out of, the milk jug is, obviously milk is a really basic, from birth to, the sequence we opened with, the litter of puppies, where milk registers for us. And then, but then somehow I had some of these red LEDs. I bring lights and I bring kind of some basic components that it can work in numerous ways. And so usually lights, a few motors, magnets, things that I can easily call on if I need to for something. And in playing with these, it's like turned the milk jug into this like embers in a fireplace or something, and yeah, I don't know what else to say about this one other than everything that I'm explaining are just the most obvious kind of descriptive layers to the works, and beyond that, I think is the part that's harder for me to broach. So I think that's it for the images.
Are you all set for some questions?
Say what?
Are you all set for some questions?
Yeah. What time do we? Yeah. I think we'll go to questions. I had planned to show some footage of an artist that I really love. His name is Arthur Doyle, and I think we'll have a chance to play one of his compositions on the way out. But maybe we can leave reference to the clip I was going to show because it's really great. And but I want to answer these questions because some of them look great. So
there are some great ones coming through. I mean, this is an exhibition that has really touched people, and we've had a lot of profound conversations. And I think there's a particular generosity in your work, even when it comes to space, be it kind of physical or cognitive. And quite a lot of the questions coming through are, loosely about the relationship with the viewer, the space for the viewer, what we bring to it, what you allow us to bring to it. I want to start with actually a longer question from Camilla. Camilla, I think you came to our exhibition tour a couple of weeks ago, so it's really nice to have you back here. And I'm going to read everything because it's a message to you as well. So we're going to start off by saying thank you, Michael, for being exactly who you are. I truly found my home within your work. I resonate so much with how hard it is to articulate process, particularly when it feels like a way of being, but also some version of a hazy structure and pattern to it too. To offer my perspective on your thoughts on why me, which you said right at the start, you hold a distinctive strength to mentally and cognitively explore the unknown of who we are and what we are on a macro and micro scale. That exploration brings about certain darkness and depth that not many of us can manage or cope with. Then you're able to formulate yourself and a vast experience into beautiful renditions of life, death for others, exceptional with exceptional ripple effects. They acknowledge that this is a tricky question to answer, so do so in whatever way you see fit. What is the most significant thing or things you learned about yourself and other human beings through your work? What connects you and what disconnects you?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's not very hard to answer. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is that that's just primary to it's even before working. And I think everything about my practice has been developed. Like I don't understand what we do, and there's another question that talked about learning to work or working to learn. This dynamic, So like the idea of connection to other human beings, it's like, I mean, what else do any of us ever want? I mean, that's really, for me, the substance of a good day is a day that I feel connected. And what disconnects me, is fear, of any kind. And I mean, very simple things that I discovered early on, but I think the complexity of life and situations, like going to do an exhibition and feeling like, how do I, for me, it's just too good to be true that I get that people want to see this and I get to do this coming from a family where most people have defined themselves, by 50-hour work weeks, doing some type of labor. So I take that privilege really seriously, and really want to try to connect with people and get, even if 5 minutes of their life, if they can, feel like that, at least I'm coming directly and from the heart. So yeah, and such nice words. Yeah.
I'm really pleased we've got a question also about music. And
Yeah.
again, we could spend an hour, many hours talking about music. I look at your shelves beside you. You talk about this alphabet as a starting point, and there's a really interesting parity in your process with actually songwriting and that sort of improvisational path and rest and rhythm and pause, and again, what you put in, what you take away. But the question, the song UK Grim by the band Sleaford Mods kept rolling through this person's head as they walked through the exhibition. The lyric crisis stamina seemed to fit with the experience you created.
Wait, repeat the phrase.
The lyric crisis stamina.
Crisis stamina. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was, when I first started working, I felt kind of the opposite. It felt as though the world was humming along, whistling, and even if wasn't able to articulate it then, I think I was really concerned with. I think at a young age, I noticed it in my children. It's probably universal and happens with every generation. But you, at that age where you're still fairly innocent, but you're starting to really see things as they are, it's troubling, And the biggest concern for me was that by the end of as we were kind of coming out of COVID, everything was so completely blasted beyond any recognizable, any attempt at trying to normalize or justify what was happening, that when you find yourself firmly in the acknowledgement that the world is, it's like, I felt like for a while, how do I not just feed vomit back to the sick? Like, how do I make work? Because for me, it's like trouble. The art world it's like a place where people are willing to dive in, but there's also a speed and a surface of, that's the opposite in many ways. So yeah, and I think for me the key is that just somewhere in the process, it's never like just down, or like for me, the crisis, the potential in a crisis is like how care happens. So I think ideally there are things, I mean, learning to survive, and more importantly, maybe feel like you're, to stay off the roof, and like I have children. I mean, you can't give hope if you don't have any. So these are really difficult things, and I think, as long as the work kind of tumbles back and there's tenderness, and there's parts of it that aren't just gloom and doom. But yeah, I don't know if I'm answering that, but yeah.
I think so. And there are a number of questions about your relationship to association. So how much association is something that you embed in an object or have as a fixed entity, or, manipulate, or how much you leave it for others to apply. Yeah, so maybe you could just say something about association, relationships, how
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there,
space.
yeah, yeah. That's like the whole of all of it to me. I mean, I think there's works where literally the way two materials connect uh, clearly mean something, and then there's works where it's much more diffuse and difficult. And in a full exhibition setting, I think sometimes the works that look more traditionally like works are, they're not quite decoys, but they're like invitations to continue that process. I mean, so maybe like different levels of reading and experiencing, but they all have the same thing. I mean, I would prefer that the materials or the works and the show as a whole, I think the ideal for me would be that they're all connected. They make sense in a way, but they're kind of inexhaustible in terms of, you know, lining everything up. I mean, some people's experience, I mean, there's been shows, and I've had people who experienced the work and completely dumbfounded in terms that it's almost like trickery or and I do think there's definitely some fallout that I appreciate, because that I see every day too. I mean, there's at least as much, if not vastly more, chaos and confusion and doubt and darkness in a day than there is order and understanding. But yeah, I mean, I think again, it's just a basic intuitive part of living that I then try to take to a different level in working. But I definitely, I mean, I think that there's not anything that doesn't kind of depend on its relationship to other materials within the exhibition, and that those are pretty well thought out. And that's where like editing is important, because so many times we will find trains of thought or ways to read work and materials that are things that I do not want there, unintended things. And so that's like a really important part of the practice, is getting rid of anything that, giving people enough free. It's almost like a jungle gym or something, or I think of kids playing in a kind of caged like bars where you can climb in and go around. So there's a structure there, but you have room to move in it and associate what you will. I don't think I'm answering this very well, but it's a try.
You are. We're almost running out of time. There's a question about space, sparsity, the void, and you certainly had this very interesting phrase when we're putting the exhibition together, that on the one hand there's sparse, and on the other hand there's not enough.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so in school and stuff, I didn't grow. I wasn't a big reader growing up, and so I remember being in art school, and I would voraciously consume images, but I didn't bother most times to try to read, and then that grew into hearing a general distrust in histories and recognizing the relativity and angles and multiplicity of histories and stories and who tell them reinforce the idea that there's nothing there. But I do remember an implied, people's questioning of my interest in, what people term as minimalism or emptiness. And it always confused me on multiple levels, because my interest in it, I think, was just in the clarity and calm of, like, for instance, the idea I've had, think that it's like indulgent to waste so much space. And for me, it's like I don't listen to two songs at one time. And so the idea that there would be multiple works in your view at the same time, if they're not meant to be there, it just seems like it hurts more than it helps. So for me, they don't ever feel empty. They feel balanced. And then, in terms of space itself and in society, and I mean, for me, I think more along the lines of deserts or black holes or, evictions. And, there's so many instances where that same essentialism works in the reverse. and then also just the history associated with it, and my family's difficulty with entering work like that. I think it just continued to reinforce and refine like a very productive dynamic. And like, so for instance, you said sparse and then and not enough. The difference being, if you hang a show just right, if you ride that line right, then it has that kind of rarefied, perfect. That is some, like, I think of like a jeans store where there's like one attendant and two pairs of jeans on a table. This really, really repelling kind of feeling of something being just locked in like that. But then if you take it a bit further, people actually start to question what's happening, or like, the idea that someone would come to a show and genuinely feel like it's a letdown or not enough is something that I'm totally welcome, and or like openings, how you contend with bodies in a space. I mean, a lot of times the openings are so painful and hilarious because when bodies show up to a show like that, they kind of blot out and obscure your ability to even see what is work or where it's at. So it feels sometimes really awkward and hilarious to see the place just disappear under that kind of pressure. So I could talk about these relationships to space and, on so many levels. There's also neurosis. I've always, I clean when my head's a mess. So it's like, when everything's tight and gotten rid of, I start to be able to breathe more. So there's lots of reasons why I do that. So hope that helped.
Thank you ever so much. I'm going to bring us to a close, but as ever, you've been so generous with your words, your thoughts, your introductions, your insight into your processes. Please, anyone who hasn't seen the exhibition, come along. Again, it closes on June 18th. Even if you have come, just come again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your questions. Michael, thank you. I'm going to hand back to you for the penultimate word, because there's another voice to come.
Yeah. So, I mean, if there's still time and anyone wants to hang out afterwards, I had planned to try to squeeze in some conversation around an artist I really love and admire, who's passed now. His name is Arthur Doyle, and he was a jazz musician, or that's how he's considered by most, but you just see him as an artist in the whole. And so we're just going to play a track from an album of his called The Song, I think it's The Songbook. The Songwriter from 1995, and it's Arthur Doyle's version of Are You Sleeping? And I wish I had more time to share. I think he's like an incredible artist, and I hope you guys dig in. Yeah, that's it. So.
Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Rolly, rolly, do. Start over. you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Rolly, rolly, do, rolly, rolly, do. Mighty, mighty Akbar, mighty, mighty Akbar. Ring them bell, pay them bill. They soldier here, there in hell. They stink and smell. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Rolly, rolly, do, rolly, rolly, do. Mighty, mighty Akbar, mighty, mighty Akbar. Ring them bell, pay them bill. They soldier hell, there in hell. They stink and smell. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Ha ha ha, we all never shall we never let out. Oh, baby, yeah. Wait never shall we never we all never let out. Shall we do the wait a little, wait a little, shall we do the wait a little, shall we do the Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Rolly, rolly, do, rolly, rolly, do. Mighty, mighty Akbar, mighty, mighty Akbar. Ring them bells, pay them bills. They soldier here, there in hell. They stink and smell. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Rolly, rolly, do, rolly, rolly, do. Mighty, mighty Akbar, mighty, mighty Akbar. Ring them bell, pay them bill. They soldier here, there in hell. They stink and smell. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha.